Hello and welcome to a special edition of Tiffin Talks. I have with me the remarkably witty Papa CJ. We're not going to ask you to tell us a joke, CJ. I know
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
That is one of your life's biggest traumas. People coming up to you and saying, "Ek chutkula suna do."
No, it's no problem, Kaveree. You can ask me to tell you a joke, but rest assured, I will be sending you an invoice after this interview.
Wonderful. I love that. We're talking about not just CJ's life, but also this remarkable book that he's written. It's called Naked, which is the name of his show as well. And Papa CJ. And we have an endorsement from no less than Russell Peters, heartwarming, inspiring, and hilarious. And I have to add, CJ, a touch sad, and that's really, I don't know, one shouldn't say that to a comedian, but one of the overwhelming feelings that I had when I read it was of so much sadness, because I think you've channeled all that into this remarkable career. All the feelings that you have for your family, for your friends, for the person you were when you were younger, the sort of misdirections, and when you were a young adult, and then sort of coming back and rediscovering or discovering what your true where your true talent lay. And I felt that there was so much there that and I felt, which is a remarkable thing for a book, to read it and to feel something, I think is such an important thing in today's world where there's so little empathy. So I want to congratulate you for writing something that is really inspiring. I think not just for young people who read it, but for others as well. It's never too late to do what you really want to. And that really is something that you've done. So congratulations and thank you for coming on Tiffin Talks. And no, we don't have any money to pay you, but we will give you all our love. And yeah, so tell me, why did you want to write this book? That's the most obvious question, I know, but why did you want to write it?
Okay, two things before that. Firstly, thank you for your kind words coming from you. That is, I'm extremely humbled to receive praise on the book from somebody like yourself. Secondly, what I will say is, I mean, it's wonderful that you got to feel while you were reading the book, but I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you in terms of my life being sad.
No,
I think
your life isn't sad, sorry, CJ, but I think some of the events they're so moving, I didn't mean to say that your life is tragic. Far from it.
No, I think what really works for me as is that, so often they have this stereotype of the clown or the joker being the person who's really sad. The fact is that even the book, it uses the vehicle of my life to talk about the human experience. Because for me, every single person, at least I know, who has read the book, at some point is thinking, wait a second, this is not just his life, this is my life as well, because I have gone through similar experiences. I think we're truly blessed to be in the careers we're in, especially as comedians, because we are able to look at the tragic events in our life, as you call them, and able to find the funny in them. And in being able to laugh at them and look at the lighter side of them, not only does it become easier for us, but when we share those experiences with our audiences, with our readers, then at some level, they're also able to look at the tragic events in their life and say, hey, wait a second, if he can find the humor in his tragedy, so to say, why can't I find the same in mine? I don't know if you agree with that or if that resonates with you.
No, absolutely. I think I agree with you entirely. And I think it's not just that, but also, for anyone who's lived in Calcutta, the part about Calcutta, and it's still very much in your heart, I think.
Yeah.
You talk about it. I think it's so true. And the middle class life that we've led, I just want to describe for people who've not read the book. Things like the tomato ketchup tasting like tomato soup towards the end. Not knowing that, you could use a shampoo for your hair because we've always used soap. Little things like that, they're so true.
Yeah.
You revisited all this. Did you feel a pang of I'm sorry to use sadness again, but did you feel a pang of nostalgia, sadness for the
Well,
life that we had led?
nostalgia, yes.
Hmm.
It was wonderful to be able to relive those memories in the process of writing the book.
Hmm.
But Kaveri, I am the most disgustingly positive person you will find. And I say that, I mean, it's really extreme. But I believe that, every phase in life has its own place. And there's something special or different or new that it brings to your life. And as my father always says, every experience furthers, so I kind of enjoy every different phase of life for what it brings. And I never sort of look back saying, oh, I wish I was there. But I always kind of look forward to what else life has to throw my way.
You brought in your father, and your book is really also a dedication of love to your family, to your parents, and it's again so moving. He's been there, your parents have been there for whatever you said, whenever, to pick you up from airport
Yeah,
to, always had your back. What a
yeah.
lovely relationship you have with him.
I feel truly blessed, for uh, the relationship I share with both my parents. In fact, it's quite funny. If you asked me in an interview, what are your greatest strengths? I would say it would be my parents. And if you asked me what are your greatest weaknesses, I would also say my parents.
Yeah,
So yeah, I feel truly blessed to have had uh, a family that has always, like you said, had my back
yeah.
and supported me regardless uh, of what it is I was pursuing. And the interesting thing is they have also never tried to push me in a certain direction,
Mm.
or try and influence my decisions. Yes, if I was uh, going to do something which is drastically wrong, they might try and nudge me in one direction. Uh, but I think it's wonderful that they've let me be independent and follow my own path while supporting me throughout the way as well. I mean,
And
like with comedy, one of the questions I get asked so regularly is, you're a kid of middle class parents who went to Oxford University, got a job in a consulting firm in London. I mean, this is the middle class dream.
absolutely.
And then you chucked it up to do stand up comedy. What on earth did your parents say? And the funny thing is that they supported me all the way through because they could see that I had found something that I absolutely love doing. Of course, it was 10 years later that they told me, listen, we thought you'd just do it for 6 months and stop, but you just kept going on. So even when they weren't sure whether I would stick with it, they still kind of supported me because they saw that it was something that I was passionate about.
And another question you get asked a lot is, yes, I mean, you tell jokes for a living, but what do you do? What do you actually do?
Yeah, so I
But
remember
less so, I think, CJ.
I mean, now stand-up comedy is an established profession. But when I moved back to India and I started off the English language circuit from Delhi, I remember distinctly an auntie asking me, she said, Beta, tum kya karte ho? What do you do? So I said, Auntie, मैं jokes सुनाता हूँ. I'm a comedian. I tell jokes. She said, Beta, even I tell jokes. What do you do for a living? तुम काम क्या करते हो? So, but I think over the course of time that has changed. And people are recognizing stand-up comedy as a legitimate profession. Unfortunately, though, the only time stand-up comedy makes the news is when something goes wrong, or as in recent news, when somebody goes to jail.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all right.
But CJ, you've stuck to live more or less, and you made that very clear. That's really where your passion lies, that whole excitement, the electricity in the air. So
Yeah,
why that? Why have you not done, uh, you know, um, series? And I'm sure there have been lots of people who've approached you.
I think Kaveri, for me, as they say, as I've always said, that I didn't leave the corporate world and join the creative field to be in a rat race in the creative field. you know I understand that being on digital media and series and stuff uh, can sort of progress your career, so to say, at a faster pace. But I literally do this for the love of the game. I love live stand up. I love the spontaneity of not knowing what's going to happen in front of a live audience. I love seeing the smiles on their faces. I love that. Sorry, did that get cut?
No,
I'll
we're
jump in
not,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
You have to contain, yeah.
Yeah, I love seeing the smiles on their faces. I love that that live interaction. I'm the kind of comic who doesn't just stay on stage. I don't just interact with the front two rows of my audience. I will take a cordless mic. I will get into middle of the audience. I will go to the back of the room. If somebody's phone rings, I will answer that phone, put it on speakerphone on the microphone, and interact with not just the person at the other end of the line, but the person whose phone it is as well. So I love the magic of that. Now, for me to be in front of a camera with maybe one camera person there or a few people, and to do multiple retakes and be sitting around waiting half the day in a vanity van, I don't think that would give me that kind of joy. I mean, sure, I'm not close to it. Should something interesting come along, I'd be happy to try it out. But I still sort of view comedy and most things I do um, as hobbies, as things that I enjoy doing. I mean, by the grace of God, I'm in a place where I don't necessarily, by the grace of God, I'm fortunately in a place where I don't necessarily have to do something every day to make ends meet. So that allows me the luxury of choosing to do things that I enjoy doing, which is why live is what works for me.
Right. And CJ, there in live, you've also mentored so many young comedians, and you've given them their first breaks, and you've all been together when comedy was still not a serious business. When you look around you and you look at some of the comedy that's going on, what are your first thoughts?
Well, for starters, I hardly watch any comedy, to be honest, Kaveree. I watch a lot more sport than I do watch comedy. But for me, it always gives me great joy to see other people succeed. It's one of the reasons I do a sort of corporate training, executive coaching, mentoring, is because it gives me great. I mean, I don't believe I'm in the comedy business. If I was to define my purpose, I would say my purpose is to uplift others and help them be the best versions of themselves. So I always love seeing people succeed. It gives me great joy. And the magic of comedy in our country is that it doesn't matter what kind of a comedian you are and what you do. There is an audience for almost everything. And it's wonderful to see regional comedy rise. So yeah, for me, it's always nice to see people doing well, trying different things, and just having a good time.
So, CJ, you really worked so hard to make it in the British comedy circuit. And, some of the things that you've written about, those bus rides, and they're really amazing work. Talk a little about that whole struggle when you were in a great job at IBM. Nobody asked you to leave. They were giving you a sabbatical with your pay, and at some point, almost the entire pay. I mean, I would love that. Uh, uh, Yet you chose the harder paths, the tougher paths, the path, as they say, less traveled. What was that? What was that thing that flipped in your mind?
A couple of things, Kaveri. I mean, firstly, as a kid, and my parents would always say this, I enjoyed excelling or trying to excel at everything I did, whether it was a different kind of sport or academics or whatever, or being in the school band. But they could never see me passionate about something. I like to do well at things, but I wasn't absolutely crazy and passionate about something. Now, with stand-up comedy, it was the first time in my life at age 27 that I had found something that I absolutely love doing. The other thing is, I think the reason I was able to do what I did in the UK, I mean, I did 700 gigs in 3 years.
Yeah, amazing.
Is I was completely ignorant. I had never seen stand-up comedy before I started doing it. I had no idea how small the chances were of actually succeeding and making a living in this profession. So I just kept doing it. And I'd say in those 700 gigs, 400 of those would have been out of town. So the London gigs were smaller gigs, kind of like you have your open mics now, where you probably have more comedians than audiences. And it was not necessarily the best experience. But the out of town gig, you went to a smaller town, somewhere outside London, where you had 300 people show up, and as the new comic, you would get to do the middle spot and you got to do 10 minutes as opposed to 5 in front of this audience. But what was nicer was, say, on average, you spent 8 hours on that journey, 4 hours going, 4 hours coming. But you were in a car with 2 other comedians who had been doing stand-up comedy for between 10 and 20 years. So you saw how they prepared their shows. I used to grovel and tell them, please, watch my performance. Please give me feedback. You saw how they analyzed their shows on the way back. So you saw them when you went to a room that was difficult and you failed on stage. You saw another comedian with experience get on the same stage in front of us, the same audience on the same night, and turn it around.
Right.
So I have spent over 2,000 hours in cars with comedians who had been doing comedy for between 10 and 20 years. So for me, that was comedy university right there. I can't imagine an education greater than that. So that was fabulous as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It was difficult. I remember in my first year, I used to wake up at about 10:30 in the morning, cook one meal for myself at about 2 o'clock. I would get into some comedian's car to drive to some city. I'd be performing between 5 and 10 minutes for no money. I got dropped back in the outskirts of London at about 1:32 in the morning. I would pay the driver my share of petrol. Keep in mind, we were not getting paid for any of these shows. I would change 3 different buses to get home, sometimes waiting for 45 minutes in cold London winter. I would get home at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning. I did this every single day for an entire year. At the end of that year, I had no money, no friends, no relationships, and no life. But every single comedy promoter in the country knew my name. So that's kind of how it started.
And I love it when you go to the airport and you change all the home pages to Papa.
Yeah. The things I used to do. In those days, of course, you had at airports, you had these business centers where they had these terminals and they would put these computer screens. So when nobody is looking, I would go to every single computer. I would open the browser and I would change the homepage to papacj.com. Then after a year of doing stand-up, I went broke. So I joined a recruitment firm and I used to work in the day and I used to perform at night. And when you go to restaurants, you can kind of drop your business card. And then sort of once a month, they'll sort of pick out a lucky winner who gets a free meal sort of thing. It's for them basically to build their database. So I used to go to these restaurants and when nobody was looking, I would steal those business cards. And then I would go to the office, cold call these guys, place them in jobs and get a commission. So that kind of financed my comedy habit.
Amazing stuff. So, I mean, Malcolm Gladwell tells us that 10,000 hours of doing something gets you perfect. So you've done 2,000 hours of traveling in cars with comedians. And the rest of the time, I guess the 8,000 hours must be all the comedy that you actually did.
So I think another 8,000 hours in cars with comedians, and I'll know which ones to avoid.
CJ, I've also wondered, is there a distinct difference between British humor and American humor? Because increasingly we see those boundaries collapsing. Say you have a John Oliver, making the transition. You have something like Fleabag, which is very British, doing very well in America. Is there a distinct difference, or are those borders collapsing?
So there's a story that I tell in terms of how I describe the difference. In the US, especially the West Coast, stand-up comedy is often a means to an end. I'm going to do my 7-minute set. I'm going to get noticed and I'm going to get a development deal. I'm going to get on a sitcom, right? So it's about getting on television, getting on film, getting on sort of OTT platforms. And the way it is done is it's a bit like fast food, here's a joke, here's a joke, here's a joke. I call it the McDonald's of comedy. In England, live stand-up is very much a part of their culture, So you go to any city in the UK. I've performed in more than 65 towns. in the UK.
Are there
So
any more in the UK? There must be a total of 65 towns in the UK.
Probably. I mean, I remember flying into London one year, and when you're on the plane, they show you the map of the country and all the little cities. And I remember every single dot on that map I had performed at.
Wow.
So live comedy is very much a part of their culture. And I sort of liken it to fine dining. You know, you can tell a 3-minute story with a payoff at the end, and the audience will wait for it. Of course, it's got to be the right kind of gig for that. You can do that at an art center. But if you're at a rowdy sort of Saturday night gig in a comedy club, then they won't have that level of patience. You've got to be a bit more snappy. Now, the difference when you come closer to our side of the world, in Southeast Asia, the audiences are very polite, you know. So you've got to be a bit more aggressive, a bit more in their faces. I mean, I'll crack a joke and I'll be like, that was funny, laugh. And then they're like, you know, sort of thing. Now in India, I find that English language stand-up is a little bit different to the rest of the world in that all over the world, stand-up comedy is a very grassroots art form, you know, anti-establishment, anti-elite. Right. Whereas by and large, English language stand-up is performed for the elite, you know. So the angle you're coming at it is slightly different. But by and large, your audiences are slightly well-read, they're well-traveled, and you can still do broader, talk about broader subjects. You know, whereas in the US, you literally have to dumb a few things down in order for them to get it. Whereas a good joke is where there's a pause and, you know, the audience has to do some work and then they get it.
Right. Can you do politics in India?
Can you do politics in India? Sure you can.
No, I mean, talk about politics and talk about it as it is, which is that it's very funny.
Sure you can.
But the guys...
I'm not saying you can live to tell the tale, but I'm saying you can.
I was waiting for the little sting in the tail.
You know, the thing with politics, Kaveree, is that for somebody like me, I am naturally not interested in politics or religion. You know, so it's not that I made a conscious choice.
Lucky for you.
But it so happens that, you know, it doesn't really interest me. And also I find, especially with politics, you know, you need to be well informed enough to talk about a certain subject.
Right.
And I just don't read up often enough to be, you know, well informed enough on the subject area. So yeah, I'll throw in the odd joke here and there, but I don't go deeply political because I just don't know enough about, you know, the issues or the characters or the people or the parties.
So, you know, when you, but yet when you look around, there's so much to laugh at. I mean, just in the way we live, right? And in the way we interact, you know, just a simple thing, as you said, you know, we didn't have hashtags then. We had hash, but no tags, you know. I mean, just simple things like that. But they say so much about how we are living now. I've often felt, you know, comedians are our best philosophers and sometimes even our best political commentators. But they really are our best philosophers, aren't they?
I think, Kaveree, the job, see, firstly, it's not for anyone to define what comedians do. You know, to each their own, each person has their own style. They talk about the things that are important to them or based on, you know, the kind of comedian they are. But as Mary Hirsch said, comedy is like a rubber sword. You can make a point without drawing any blood.
Lovely.
It's a beautiful way to show a mirror to society, you know, and then potentially bring about meaningful change. So I do this in a lot of colleges. In fact, I get banned from at least half the colleges I perform in. Because
I love that. There's another story there. Sorry to interrupt, but the fact that you get banned means that other college students in other colleges invite you. And,
absolutely.
And the authorities don't know that you've been banned, so they're very happy to have you. And then, of course, it goes on.
See the bright side. See, I'll tell you what happens. When I get called to colleges, firstly, it really upsets me when I get called. I talk to the students. I tell them, okay, tell me about all the things that you feel are unfair or unjust. You know. Now there is a college in Vellore where if you shake hands with a person of the opposite sex for longer than 3 seconds, that is considered a public display of affection. There is a fine for that. There is a college in Noida where if you're a foreign student, you can smoke on campus. If you're Indian, you cannot. I mean, how can that even be legal? So my problem is that for 4 years, especially at these engineering colleges, they train the minds of the students to not question, and forget not question established knowledge, not question, silly rules like this. What are these guys going to invent or discover or create when they're just programmed to follow orders?
Right.
So I go there and I question. And the faculty is not used to being questioned because they have so much power over these students that they never question. So they get upset, I get banned, and then the other colleges invite me. And the upside is for the other colleges, because when my bio goes to another college, all they see is, stand-up comedian, MBA degree from University of Oxford. And they're like, oh, yeah, this guy must be fine. And until then I get parent. But, in some cases, Kaveree, change does come about, So, for example, I performed at this college in Bangalore called the RV College of Engineering. Now, I've learned after being banned a few times that instead of doing the joke straight away, I should get agreement on principles first.
Okay.
So I had about 1,000 students in this audience. I had 3 or 4 faculty members in the front. So I asked them, I said, do any of you have children? So 2 of them said, yes, we have daughters. I said, okay, tell me this. Do you think the cost of education should be the same for boys and girls? So they said, yes, of course, definitely. I said, do you think that girls should have equal access to resources as boys? They say, oh, yes, definitely. Then I asked them, I said, do you think girls are safe on your campus? Is your campus safer, or is it safer on the streets of Bangalore? They said, no, the campus is safer. I said, okay. Then I said, okay, you just said that the girls should have equal access to resources. But the boys can go to the library on Sunday, girls cannot. Is that fair? Then I said, you said the cost of education is safer, it should be the same.
Right.
I said, today, the girls' hostel is 5 kilometers away from campus. Right? It costs 32 rupees one way to take that trip. That is 22,000 rupees a year.
Oh.
How is their cost of education not higher than the boys?
Wow.
And also, you said the campus is safer. But today, when college finishes, that girl has to get on the street, get in an auto and go 5 kilometers to her hostel, whereas the boys sit on campus. And I said, the reason I'm bringing these issues up is so that you have the chance to address them now, because in 20 years from now, your little girls will be looking at you and asking the same questions.
Wow.
So now, in fact, I just found out 3 years after I did this performance at the RV College of Engineering, in February 2021, they have opened a hostel for girls on that campus.
Excellent. It's so heartening when something like this happens. Don't you feel, wow, I've achieved something, and life becomes meaningful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's wonderful when that happens. It's wonderful when people are open enough to look into that mirror that we show them and say, yeah, there is a point there. He's not here just to make fun of us. He's actually showing us a mirror, and we can bring about meaningful change.
But the level of research that goes on, CJ, to get that kind of detail. So that means you talk a lot to the students before you come there, or, whatever your method of research is.
Absolutely. I get there and I tell them, listen, I want at least an hour and a half with at least 20 students and just talk to me, and I just listen to them. I take notes. And then I take an hour after that to turn those notes into jokes, or figure out in what way to present them, in what order to present them. And then I take that up on stage.
I think that's wonderful. No wonder people love you, and especially young people. But this reminds me of what you have written as well, that, when you went into that Hindu college class, you saw people reading books like Physics is Fun, and you said, this is not for me. What was going on in that young person's mind at that point?
Kaveree, I went to a boarding school in Himachal. We had very little exposure to what careers were like. I think I was always a decent student in school. And as a result, nobody ever told me that, the class 12 board exam was important. I hardly studied for it. And also, this was the time when that whole plague happened, and our school was actually shut down for 6 months in class 12. So I got no teaching, I had no tuition, there was a lot going on. So I didn't get very high marks in my class 12. And then I came to Delhi, a city that I had never been to before. And I had no idea about the admissions process. I used to go to these colleges with a thick file with certificates on, academics, sports, extracurricular activities, and all they wanted was that one piece of paper, their board exam mark sheet. And it was a real shock to my system in terms of the way I had been brought up, because I grew up in a school which focused on all-round development and things like that, but it came down to this one mark sheet. And then I got into sports quota into Hindu college, and I didn't know about any sort of degrees. They said, we can't give you BCom, we can't give you eco, take any other subject you want. I really didn't know. And sort of BSc honors electronics sounded very fancy. And I think in the age that we grew up in, we were always told that if you were a smart kid, you took science. Right? If you didn't have the brains for science, then you took commerce.
Yeah.
And if you were a complete duffer, then you went into arts. Right? There was literally no hope for you. And the logic, we were always told that if you take science, you can keep your options open.
Yeah.
Because after science, you can do commerce. But after commerce, you can't do science, etc., etc. So I said, fine, yeah, let's do this. BSc honors electronics sounds very fancy. And then I walked into this class, and people were talking, everything was kind of going above my head. And I was like, you know what, this is not for me. So yeah, it was tough. And it was tough because I moved to a correspondence course.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get that university experience that every kid looks forward to, about finishing school and going to college. But it's okay. It's part of the deal.
No, but I mean, I think kids these days, when they're, shut at homes and they're taking their online classes during the pandemic, I think, they will really sort of respond to this, and they'll understand what you went through. This is what kids these days are going through in a way.
Yeah, it's really difficult nowadays. I mean, I feel bad for the kids who are in their homes and having to spend such special years of their lives, at home, as opposed to in colleges interacting with people their age and getting that whole experience.
And yet, you went to Oxford, I mean, and to the said business school, which is amazing. That it itself is such an inspirational journey. I'm sure kids have come up to you and said, how did you do it?
Oh, it was just hard work and fluke. So I got a first division in my first year of college. In my second year of college, I almost failed because I hardly studied. I got 40%. I flunked 2 subjects. Had I got half a mark less, I would have failed that year. And then I gave the CA foundation exam for chartered accountancy. I actually got an all India rank. But then I figured this was something I just could not do. In those days, as a BCom honors graduate, what jobs could you get? So you had to explore everything. So then I decided I would do an MBA. And the only way I could get into a good college was to get a first div in my in my college degree. So I gave half the exams from my second year again. And I remember I had gone to the British Council in Calcutta. Had this sort of exhibition, and a few universities were down. And there was a guy who came from the University of Swansea. And I asked him about admission. And he says, with your experience, I'm not sure we would give you admission. And I said, well, what if I got a 700 plus on the GMAT, which was on 8, it was a test on 800. He says, oh, in that case, drop me a line. We'd love to have you. So in my third year, I gave half of my second year exams. Again, I worked really hard. For the GMAT, I studied for 10 days, but those 10 days I was locked into a room. I got above a 700. I sort of got a first div again in my college degree. I got admission to Oxford. And then, a little cocky shit that I was, I sent an email to Swansea saying, listen, I've got 700 plus, but hey, I'm not coming to your school. I'm going to Oxford. What an ass.
I wondered, did you perform at Swansea ever?
I'm pretty sure I did, actually. In fact, and it must have been a university gig as well.
Right. Amazing. Yeah. So, but also those were the years when you were possibly the only Indian who was performing comedy. Talk a bit about what that was like.
Let me rewind a little bit. I should tell you one more story. In my second year of college, the year I did really badly, so accounts was new to me. So in my first year of college, I got a 67%, but my marks in accounts were really low. So in the second year of college, I said, you know what, I'm going to give that accounts paper again. because I think I can improve my percentage. And because I was doing a correspondence course, I didn't have a fixed college to go to. We would get assigned these centers. So I was assigned this center, and I went there. I paid my auto rickshaw driver another 100 rupees. I said, I want you to wait for 10 minutes. My plan was, I'm going to sit at the table next to the door. I'm going to see that accounts paper. And if it looks like a paper where I can do really well, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do that paper. And if it looks like a paper that is difficult, I'm going to run, right? I'm just going to run out of the college. I was a quick runner at that point, get into the auto and just run away. And they'll have no way to find me because, it's just a roll number and they don't have that. I haven't written it down. It's not my college. So I looked at that accounts paper and I looked at it and I thought, you know what? I'm going to get 100 on 100 in this. This is so easy. So I gave the paper and I failed the subject. So even my first year marks kind of came down that year.
But
yeah,
amazing stories. That's why, people really relate to all this because, everyone has done stuff like this in their lives.
Yeah.
But talk a little about being possibly the only Indian in, a room full of Brits, all maybe with pints of ale down and you trying to entertain them.
So here's the thing. I was the only Indian stand-up comedian in the UK. Of how many over 1,000 comics there were in the country, I was the only Indian guy. There were a handful of second-generation Indians, so British Asians. There's a Paul Chaudhary, Paul Sinha, Inder Manocha, Jay Sodagar. I can literally name, there were like 5 of them. Jason Kavan, 5 people. And I still remember, I used to do a lot of jokes about my background. And I always wanted to represent India in a positive light. Because their perception of Indians was the guy they would see at the newsagent, and they felt it's okay to pick on this guy. So, in fact, whenever I had somebody heckle me, I remember I was doing a show in Reading, and there was a table full of football hooligans, these skinheads and really big-built guys. And they decided to pick on me. And I took the biggest, toughest guy, and I absolutely ripped him to shreds because I wanted to make sure that the next time he sees an Indian on the road, he thinks twice before making fun of him because he knows the guy can give it back. I mean, that's why one of the first few lines that I came up with, which is sort of become a signature line all over the world. People come to me and recite it on my face or ask me to say it.
Yeah, I also want to do that.
So I used to say, don't mess with us Indians because we come from the land of the Kama Sutra. We can fuck you in more ways than you can count.
Classic.
So that's one of the things I used to say. But I still remember that I had a few experienced comedians who would tell me that, CJ, you shouldn't talk about being Indian, because you'll get pigeonholed as, the Indian comic. Right. But I think my perspective on that was slightly different. Because I don't want to be just the next, white comic talking about his ex-girlfriend or his breakup. My point of view was that if I don't talk about being Indian, who will?
Exactly.
Who's going to bring on to the table the perspective of somebody from my background, living and working in a foreign country or my upbringing. So that's something I wanted to do.
Right. And you did that very successfully. I think you made that your métier.
I don't even know what that word means.
No, I mean, it became your niche. It became your go-to thing. I mean, So in a sense, it's good that people expected that of you, and you delivered that to them. Is that important to fulfill a certain expectation?
No, I don't think so. I think so. There's a process. There's an evolution that takes place. When you're doing stand-up. So initially, when you start, you want to go for the easy joke. You want the confidence that you can make people laugh. So in the UK, I would get on stage and the first line I would say is, would you believe it? Nowadays, even your comedy is being outsourced. Boom, you've got that. So the easy joke I would do in India, for example, is I live in Delhi. And as somebody who lives in Delhi, we don't understand the language they speak in Mumbai. We call it bread, they call it pav. We call it pyaz, they call it kanda. We call it a servant quarter, they call it a 2 BHK. So that's the easy one. Then you do observational comedy. That's a stream that kind of stays all the way through.
Right.
So the kind of joke I would do is that, I grew up in Calcutta, And I remember taking driving lessons in London. And this instructor asked me, he says, "Oh, you Indians, why don't you drive in a straight line?" I said, "Boss, I grew up in Calcutta. In England, you drive on the left of the road. In Calcutta, we drive on what is left of the road." Right? Then what happens is we want to be seen as cool. We want to be seen as edgy, you know. So we will do politics. We will pick on the establishment. We will use foul language. We will also do jokes that make us look intelligent or feel intelligent.
Right.
So the kind of joke I would do is that I went to the US and I got to immigration, and I had a beard at this point. This officer looks at my passport, looks at my beard. He says, "You know what, you Indians, you're a mistake. In fact, India is a mistake." I said, "Come on, officer. As an American, you should be grateful to us." He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because when Christopher Columbus discovered America, he was looking for India. So to be perfectly honest, you are the fucking mistake." So now that's the kind of joke, and an audience listens to it. There's a pause, and they're like, "Yeah, Christopher Columbus did discover America," you know? So it kind of makes you feel intelligent. You get a round of applause. But I think eventually, Kaveree, what happens is that we operate in a profession that has no rules, no boundaries, no guidelines, no social norms. So as I've always said, it's the first line before you start my book, is that stand-up comedy is an outward expression of an inward journey. So, and that's the same for many art forms. The journey eventually is inward, and you talk about the things that you feel passionately about, you know, and your point of view. And the idea is to be as authentic as possible. So I think eventually you get to a point where you don't even care about the audience, you know. You're like, this is what I believe. This is what I think is funny. If it works for you, fine. If it doesn't, also fine. And your audience will find you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot more important, because if you're always trying to please somebody or meet their expectations, that audience changes, their expectations change. And where is your voice then, you know?
I think that's
So,
true of all artists. You really,
yeah,
you know, hit it on the nail. CJ, I want to go back to 2007 when you came back to India, when it seemed that, you know, the world was open, America was beckoning. You had just
yeah,
entered this contest and you were in the final 10, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, last comic standing,
Right.
yes.
So that was a big deal, and you know, you could have really established yourself in America as well. Then you would have had two continents, you know, to
Yeah,
tell the India story too. Yet you
yeah.
came back. What made you come back?
I think, Kaveree, at the end of the day, I am just very desi at heart. You know, I missed home. Everybody who I love or is important to me was back here. And for me, there is no amount of career success that would have been worth it for me to be in a different part of the world. You know, I had even got a work permit for the US at that point, which is very difficult to get. But I was just moving back home after being in the UK for 8 years. I didn't want to change that. I think it's one of the reasons why even today I'm based out of Delhi and not Bombay. I know that being in Bombay, I could, my career would supposedly progress at 5 times the rate, because the entire industry is there. You're meeting people, you're making connections, you know. But there's a simple way for me to answer that question. You know, during the lockdown, I have been going every morning and getting a cup of coffee with my dad. And I remember somebody spoke to me and said that, you know, CJ, that for this whole year, every day you go and have a cup of coffee. You know, 2 coffees cost you 360 rupees. In 1 year, you must be spending over 1 lakh on coffee. So my reply to this person was that every morning for 1 year, I get 1 hour of quality time with my dad. That's priceless. How can you put a value on that?
Yeah.
You know? So for me, I think the way I'm built, the career is not as important as the relationships and the time I get to spend with the people who are closest to me. You know, if you see any studies of happiness, if you talk to people who are 90 years old or any age for that matter, and you ask them their regrets, the number one regret is not having spent enough time with people they love. You know, I don't ever want to be in that position.
So well put. Has your family read the book? I wonder what they think of it.
They have actually. In fact, I remember my mother telling me, she says there are so many things in here that I didn't know. and so many things that I'm learning about you by reading this book. Because in the book, I've literally sort of laid it all out. Whereas normally with the family, as happens with a lot of us, we tend to, if we are going through certain challenges, sometimes you tend to not share them with those closest to you, because when they can't do something about it, you don't want them to have that, to go through the pain or the suffering or the sense of helplessness of not being able to do something about it.
And your dad, it's like a love letter to your parents. What does your dad have to say about
So my dad is not, he's not much of a speaker.
it?
So, but yeah,
How
I can.
naturally, as a son like you mustn't be giving him a word in edgeways, poor thing.
No, not at all. I'm quite a good mix of my mom and dad.
Okay.
I've always wanted to be like my father. I have always been exactly like my mother. But I think now I'm finding the middle ground. I'm closer to the middle ground. My father, so my mom is the entertainer. You know, she likes the attention. She's the life of a party. She's the stand-up comedian who will always have a joke. She's kind of out there. My father, on the other hand, is a storyteller.
Right.
So he's the kind of person who will whisper so that people lean in, you know, and he can make a conversation with anybody, any background, any age group, you know. And I think that's something that I'd like to believe it's a quality I've picked up from him. But also, I'm a reasonably good listener. In fact, if I go to a party or a social event where nobody knows me or knows what I do, I will tell them that I'm an actor.
Does it happen?
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah?
It happens. Not so much in India, but it does happen. But if I am in such a place and people ask me what I do, I will tell them I'm an accountant, because nobody wants to talk to an accountant. So as a result, I then get to listen to them. I hear about their stories. I hear about what they do, their experiences, what motivates them. Because the problem with telling people you're a comedian is everybody, oh, stand-up comedy, tell me about, you know. I remember a very funny incident. My friend Sam was visiting from Australia. We grew up together. His real name is Somjit, in Calcutta. And he had moved to Australia. And he had come back, and we went to a Chinese restaurant in Calcutta for dinner. So there was just the two of us. And the daughter of the gentleman who owned the restaurant came and joined us and was chatting with us. So Sam was flirting with her full on, right? For 25 minutes, he was chatting with her. She said, what do you do? He says, you know, I live in Melbourne and I work in IT sales. And this whole thing went on for 25 minutes. And I was just keeping quiet and listening. And then just out of courtesy or guilt, you know, she asked me, so what do you do? And I said, oh, I do stand-up comedy. After that, Kaveree, she just stopped talking to him. And the rest of the conversation was only about comedy. And afterwards, Sam was telling me, he's like, dude, I could tell her I'm an astronaut. I knew that would not kind of match. So wherever possible, I try not tell people I'm a comedian, because then that gives me the opportunity to learn about them and their experiences as well.
Right. Because, new, I mean, I suppose you call it material. I don't know what you call it, but new material is important, isn't it? How will you get it as an artist if you don't observe, if you don't listen, if you sort of are within your bubble of success? I mean, you have to go out there and listen to people, right?
Oh, absolutely. You've got to keep doing different things. And, we use our lives and our experiences to create content. So, I mean, there's a very interesting book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way. And it talks about two different things. One, there are two basic concepts. One is something called morning pages. So just like you go to the loo in the morning to get the rubbish out of your body, similarly, this is an exercise you do every morning to get the rubbish out of your mind. You wake up in the morning, first thing, and you just write 3 pages. It doesn't matter what it is, because that gives you a clarity in the head. Whatever's in your head, the noise kind of comes out. And the second thing is something called an artist's date. Once a week, you go on a date with yourself.
Okay.
And you do something you have never done before. You expose yourself to something different. Walk in a different place, cook something, experiment with a musical instrument, read the kind of thing that you would not read before. something that gives your brain a different kind of stimulation. And that then sparks the creativity, because you've already taken out the stuff with the morning pages, and now you've opened it up to take things in.
Right.
So in fact, what I've been doing, I started yesterday. I'm putting a post on my social media every day saying, give me suggestions, 5 suggestions with the letter A. And by tomorrow, within 24 hours, I will post something creative based on your suggestions, whether it's a joke, a story, a poem, and whatever it might be. So in some cases, it's just graphics. In some cases, I'm shooting videos. So today I'm posting up a whole bunch of things with the letter A based on suggestions people gave me last night.
Right.
And then tonight, again, I'm going to post the letter B and say, okay, give me what you got.
So that's fascinating. And do you do this exercise, the morning pages? Do you write 3 pages every morning?
I was doing it for a little bit, but discipline is not an area of strength, Kaveree.
It must be. Nobody can have that level of success without a certain amount of discipline.
I promise you, Kaveree, I'm very lazy. I occasionally work in short bursts, and I'm like a cheetah. I'll do a sprint and then I'll be very tired and I'll sleep the whole day.
I just made some notes on your book, and I just remembered that written this whole mixtape, making a mixtape for a girl. And that really struck me, and it's so right. I think I'm older than you, but I remember that era, what would now be called slow romance or slow life. That was our life.
Do you want me to do that bit for you?
Yes, please, because I love it, and I think kids these days will not understand even what a tape is, but I think it's important for them to know what it was like.
So this is the part of the show Naked, which obviously has gone in the book as well, where I generally pick on a young member of the audience and I ask them, what's the most romantic thing you've ever done, for your partner. And in most cases, they don't have an answer. It's something quite silly. It's very rarely that I get something solid. And then I say that, in our time, the most romantic thing you could ever do for a woman was to give her a mixtape, a compilation tape. And then I ask them to cheer and things like that if they're familiar with this. And then I'll say, in our generation, we had something called an audio cassette. And giving a girl a mixtape was by far the greatest show of commitment ever. It's not like now you drag 3 files and give her a USB stick. You had to call all your friends. You had to find out all the songs that she loved. And calling your friends wasn't easy either, Kaveree, because we didn't have mobile phones like these guys. We had dial-up phones. Remember dial-up phones? Yeah, if you came from a middle-class family like I did, your mother put a lock on that phone. Yeah, not a passcode, a physical fucking tala. So you had to wait until you went and played with your friends. But when you asked them for those songs, you lost your self-respect. Imagine a macho 19-year-old guy going to his male friends and saying, hey, bro, do you have a Nothing's Going to Change My Love for You? Yes, exactly, Kaveree. They laughed. And the worst part was each of them had that song. Right? But they just couldn't admit it. But at least we had songs that allowed us to express love. Nothing's going to change my love for you. You are the wind beneath my wings. Words are all I have. I mean, what the fuck do these guys have? Millennials. I heard a song the other day by Eminem. Kaveree, these are the lyrics. I ain't never seen an ass like that. The way she shakes it makes my pee-pee go doing, doing, doing. If my dad ever gave my mom a song that said, I ain't never seen an ass like that, she would smack him so hard, his pee-pee would never go doing, doing, doing. We had to call all our friends. We had to find out all the songs that she loved. We had to time every single song. If your romance was like these millennials, you would get her a 60-minute tape. I got my woman a 90-minute tape. Yes, I see that smile in your tape on your face, Kaveree, because we all know in our generation, size did matter. You had to time all those songs. You had to make sure you had exactly 45 minutes on each side because a gap in the tape was a gap in commitment. If you had a tape recorder where the rewind button didn't work, you would have to turn it around, fast forward it, turn it around, and hope as hell you were in the right place. If you had a tape recorder like I did, where the rewind and the fast forward buttons didn't work, what would you do? Kaveree?
I'm lost. I don't know what would I do.
Come on, Kaveree. In our generation, we had something called a pencil.
Oh, yes, of course.
It was used for an activity
That-
called writing. Yes, we would take that pencil, stick it in that tape, turn it around, and feel like fucking ninjas.
and then use that pencil to write the names of the songs in those little
Exactly.
sketches.
Exactly. So these are some of the bits I do. And then I joke that, when we went out to have a good time. Nowadays, people go out to take photographs of themselves looking like they're having a good time.
Right.
Anyway, this is some of the bits that I do in that.
But wonderful. There's so much there, CJ, for people to read, for people to savor. And of course, I'm not going to give away what your real name is. People have to buy this book.
Yeah, baby.
Yes. And I won't even tell you round about which pages it is, so that you have to read the whole book. But you'll enjoy it. I think it's a lovely book. I really enjoyed it. You will too. And it was such a pleasure, Papa CJ, to talk to you and to listen to all your tales. You're a remarkable storyteller. Please carry on.
Thank you so much, Kaveree. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much for being on Tiffin Talks.